Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving headfirst into, well, a really critical topic in genetics, the molecular basis of cancer.
That's right. We're using a chapter summary from Principles of Genetics as our guide. It really frames cancer as, fundamentally, a genetic disease.
Exactly. And our goal here is pretty straightforward. Give you a quick but solid understanding of the core genetics involved. Think inheritance, cell cycle, the specific gene types,
Yeah.
everything you'd need for, say, a college-level grasp.
We want to get right to the heart of what happens when cells, stop playing by the rules.
And the source starts with a really striking story, doesn't it?
It does. Allison and Louis Romano, brother and sister, both diagnosed with pheochromocytoma. That's a rare cancer of the adrenal glands.
And the link wasn't just family history in a general sense. It was
But it's specific.
yeah.
They both had the exact same heterozygous mutation in a gene called VHL, a tiny change, GC to AT at one spot, changing one amino acid.
Wow. So one inherited faulty gene copy basically started the clock ticking. That really drives home the inherited susceptibility angle.
Absolutely. It sets the stage perfectly. Cancer isn't just one thing. It's a whole group of diseases, all stemming from these fundamental genetic problems, mutations.
Mutations that lead to cells just growing uncontrollably.
Right. And they form tumors. Now, it's important to distinguish.
Benign versus malignant.
Exactly. Benign tumors stay put. They don't invade. But malignant tumors, those cells break loose, get into the bloodstream or lymphatics, and spread. That's metastasis.
And that spread, the metastasis, that's what's overwhelmingly responsible for cancer deaths, isn't it?
Sadly, yes, over 90%.
Okay, so let's establish the core idea firmly. Why is cancer considered fundamentally genetic?
Well, there are several key lines of evidence. First, the cancerous state itself is clonally inherited, meaning when a cancer cell divides, its daughter cells are also cancerous, it's passed down.
Makes sense.
Second, we know cancer can be induced by things that damage DNA mutagens. Think radiation, certain chemicals, carcinogens.
Right, things that cause mutations.
Precisely. And third, many cancers, especially leukemias and lymphomas, are linked to very specific, identifiable chromosomal abnormalities. Broken or rearranged chromosomes. It all points back to the DNA.
Okay, so if the DNA is the problem, where does the breakdown usually start? The source points to the cell cycle, right?
Yes, the cell cycle is fundamental. You can think of it as the cell's life cycle. G1, S phase where DNA is copied, G2, and M phase where it divides.
And normally, this cycle is tightly controlled.
Extremely tightly controlled by checkpoints. Think of them as quality control stations. Before the cell moves from G1 to S or G2 to M, it has to pass inspection.
And cancer involves mutations that mess up these checkpoints.
That's a major part of it. The control machinery itself involves proteins called cyclins and their partners, cyclin-dependent kinases or CDKs.
CDKs, the kinases add phosphate groups to things, right? They modify other proteins.
Exactly. But a CDK enzyme is inactive on its own. It needs to bind to a specific cyclin protein to get activated.
So the cyclin is like the key, and the CDK is the engine.
That's a good analogy. The levels of different cyclins rise and fall during the cycle, activating different CDKs at the right time to drive the cell forward or stop it.
And the source highlights one checkpoint as particularly critical: start in G1.
Yes, the start checkpoint or restriction point in mid-G1. Passing this point commits the cell to replicate its DNA and divide. It's a point of no return for that cycle.
Driven by, was it cyclin D and CDK4?
Primarily, yes. The cyclin D-CDK4 complex pushes the cell past start. The checkpoint ensures the cell is actually ready big enough nutrients, and crucially that its DNA isn't damaged before it starts copying it in S phase.
Ah, okay. So if that checkpoint fails because, say, the proteins regulating cyclin D-CDK4 are mutated,
Then the cell might barge ahead even if it has damaged DNA. It replicates that damage, locking in mutations. And that's how genetic instability starts to build up, leading towards cancer.
so losing checkpoint control is bad. But isn't there another layer of protection, like a self-destruct mechanism?
There is. Programmed cell death or apoptosis. It's a crucial failsafe.
How does that work?
If a cell is severely damaged or dividing when it shouldn't be, or just isn't needed anymore, the apoptotic pathway gets triggered. It's a clean way for the cell to commit suicide without causing inflammation.
Suicide by caspases. I remember reading that term.
Yes, caspases are the executioners. They're proteolytic enzymes. They chop up other proteins.
Like what kind of proteins?
Key structural things. Lamins, which support the nucleus, components of the cytoskeleton, they basically dismantle the cell from the inside out. It shrinks, fragments neatly, and gets cleared away.
So if apoptosis also fails,
Then damaged, potentially dangerous cells that should have died survive, and they can keep dividing, accumulating more mutations. It's another broken safety net.
okay, so we have faulty breaks, the checkpoints, and apoptosis failing. Now let's talk about the engine, or maybe the accelerator, oncogenes.
Right. Oncogenes are the first major class of cancer genes. They're genes that, when mutated or overactive, actively promote cell division. They push the cell forward.
The stuck accelerator analogy seems fitting.
It is. And their discovery was actually kind of fascinating. It came from studying viruses, specifically RNA viruses called retroviruses that could cause tumors in animals.
Like the rhizosarcoma virus.
Exactly. Peyton Roos discovered it way back. This virus carries a specific gene, VSRCA for viral, that's responsible for its cancer-causing ability. That was the first oncogene identified.
And VSRC turned out to be a hijacked version of one of our own genes.
Precisely. We have a normal cellular version, CSRC for cellular. CSRC is a proto-oncogene. It's involved in normal growth control. The virus basically captured this gene, probably as processed mRNA, which is why VSRC lacks the introns found in CSRC.
Yeah, and the viral version is hyperactive.
Yes. Either it's massively overexpressed compared to the normal cellular level the source mentions maybe 100 times more protein, or the protein itself is mutated to be permanently switched on.
Okay, so that's how viruses can do it. But what about oncogenes in human cancers that aren't caused by viruses?
Same principle, different mechanism. Mutations can arise spontaneously in our own proto-oncogenes, converting them into oncogenes. The classic example is the RAS family of genes.
Right, RAS comes up all the time. The source mentions CH rays in bladder cancer.
Yes, and RAS mutations are found in tons of cancers, lung, colon, pancreas. Often it's a specific point mutation, like changing the amino acid at position 12 from glycine to valine.
One tiny change, what does that do?
Well, RAS protein acts like a molecular switch in signaling pathways that tell the cell to grow. Normally, it cycles between an on state bound to GTP and an off state bound to GDP.
Okay.
That specific mutation at codon 12 messes up its ability to switch itself off. It can't hydrolyze the GTP back to GDP effectively.
So it gets stuck in the on position.
Exactly. It's constitutively active, constantly sending growth signals down the pathway, telling the cell to divide, divide, divide.
Like that stuck accelerator again?
Precisely. And the key thing about oncogenes like mutant RAS is that they are dominant. You only need one bad copy, one hit, to get that growth-promoting effect.
One hit is enough to push things forward. Okay. Besides point mutations, the source mentioned bigger problems.
Right.
Chromosomal rearrangements.
Right. Sometimes chromosomes break and rejoin incorrectly, leading to oncogene activation. Chronic Myelogenous Leukemia, CML, is the textbook case.
That's the Philadelphia chromosome, isn't it?
It is. A piece of chromosome 9 swaps places with a piece of chromosome 22. This translocation fuses part of the BCR gene on chromosome 22 with the ABL proto-oncogene from chromosome 9.
And this fusion creates what? A monster protein?
Essentially, yes, a BCR-ABL fusion protein. The ABL part is a tyrosine kinase, an enzyme that signals growth. In the fusion protein, it's hyperactive, constantly signaling, driving the proliferation of white blood cells.
Always on. Again, another mechanism is Burkitt's lymphoma.
Yes, a different translocation strategy there. Often, a break near the MYC proto-oncogene on chromosome 8 leads to it being moved right next to the highly active immunoglobulin gene regions on chromosome 14 or sometimes 2 or 22.
MYC is a transcription factor, right? It turns other genes on.
A powerful one that promotes cell division. In Burkitt's, it's not that the MYC protein itself is necessarily mutated, but its location changes.
Ah, so it gets put under the control of super strong on switches meant for antibody genes.
Exactly. Immunoglobulin genes are expressed at extremely high levels in B lymphocytes. So MYC gets massively overexpressed in those B cells, driving lymphoma development. It's like taking a normal engine and hooking it up to a jet fuel line.
Okay, that covers the accelerators pretty well. Now let's switch gears to the brakes. The tumor suppressor genes, or TSGs.
Right, the second major class, also called anti-oncogenes, their normal job is to restrain cell growth or promote cell death when things go wrong. So cancer arises when you lose their function.
And the key concept here is Knudson's two-hit hypothesis, based on retinoblastoma.
That's the foundational idea developed by Alfred Knudsen. Because these genes act as brakes, you generally need to lose both copies of the gene to lose the braking function completely. 2 inactivating hits.
So, for someone who inherits one bad copy,
They have the first hit in every cell of their body. They're already halfway there. They only need one more somatic mutation, a second hit, in a susceptible cell, like a retinal cell for retinoblastoma, for cancer to develop. That's why inherited forms often appear earlier and maybe in both eyes.
Whereas in sporadic cases, someone starts with two good copies.
Right, and they need two separate random somatic mutations to happen in the same cell lineage to knock out both copies. Much less likely. Which is why sporadic forms typically occur later in life and usually in only one eye.
Makes sense. Okay, let's talk about some key TSG proteins. The retinoblastoma protein itself, PRB.
PRB is crucial. It's a major gatekeeper for the G1S transition. Its main job is to bind to and inhibit transcription factors called E2Fs.
And E2Fs turn on genes needed for.
For S phase, DNA replication enzymes, things like that. So PRB normally keeps E2F locked down, preventing the cell from entering S phase prematurely.
Until the cell is ready.
Exactly. Late in G1, when the cell gets the right signals, cyclin CDK complexes phosphorylate PRB. This causes PRB to release E2F. E2F is then free to activate its target genes, and the cell moves into S phase.
So if you lose both copies of the RB gene,
Then there's no functional PRB protein to hold E2F back. E2F is always active, constantly telling the cell to prepare for division. The break is gone.
okay. Then there's the really big one, P53. The source calls it the most frequently mutated gene in human cancers.
It's incredibly important, often called the guardian of the genome. P53 is a transcription factor that gets activated in response to cellular stress, especially DNA damage.
And it does. What exactly? It seems to have options.
It does. Depending on the level of stress in the cellular context, it can trigger two main responses. First, cell cycle arrest.
Pausing things.
Right. P53 activates the gene for another protein called P21, and P21 directly inhibits cyclin CDK complexes, effectively hitting the pause button on the cell cycle, giving the cell time to repair the DNA damage.
Okay, a timeout for repairs. What's the second option?
If the damage is too severe to be repaired, P53 triggers apoptosis. Programs cell death.
The self-destruct sequence. How?
One way is by activating genes like BAX. BX protein promotes apoptosis, partly by counteracting anti-apoptotic proteins like BCL2, so P53 basically flips the switch towards cell death.
Wow. So losing P53 is catastrophic. You lose the pause button and the self-destruct button.
It's a double whammy, yeah. Damaged cells can continue to divide without repair, and they resist dying. That's a very dangerous combination.
The source also mentioned PAPC, linked to colon cancer.
Yes, APC is mutated in familial adenomatous polyposis, or FAP, an inherited condition causing thousands of polyps in the colon, which inevitably become cancerous. APC is also mutated in many sporadic colorectal cancers.
And its role involves β-catenin.
Exactly. Normally, in intestinal cells, the APC protein is part of a complex that targets another protein, β-catenin, for destruction. Keeping the catenin levels low prevents certain growth-promoting genes from being turned on.
So loss of ATC means
O-catenin levels rise dramatically. It goes into the nucleus and activates genes that drive cell proliferation. This leads to the formation of polyps, the precursors to cancer.
okay. And finally, there are TSGs that are directly involved in DNA repair itself.
Right. Genes like HMSH2 and others involved in mismatch repair. Mutations there cause hereditary non-polyposis colorectal cancer, HNPCC, or Lynch syndrome, and of course BRCA1 and BRCA2.
Linked to breast and ovarian cancer.
Yes, their proteins are involved in repairing DNA breaks, particularly double-strand breaks. Inheriting a faulty copy significantly increases the risk of those cancers because the cell's ability to fix DNA damage is compromised, leading to more mutations accumulating over time, potentially hitting other oncogenes or TSGs.
So putting it all together, cancer isn't usually caused by just one mutation.
Definitely not. Malignancy is almost always the result of an accumulation of multiple mutations hitting both oncogenes, the accelerators, and tumor suppressor genes, the brakes.
The source gave the example of colorectal cancer needing maybe 7 or more hits. 2 in APC, 1 in RAS, 2 in another TSG, 2 in TP53.
Exactly. It's a multi-step process, often taking years or decades, where the cell gradually acquires the genetic changes that allow it to break all the normal rules of behavior.
This leads nicely into Hanahan and Weinberg's hallmarks of cancer. These aren't specific genes, but rather the functional capabilities that cancer cells acquire through all these mutations, right?
Precisely. They outlined 6 core capabilities that are common across most, if not all, types of human cancer. They reflect the end result of all that genetic instability.
Let's quickly list them. The first 3 seem directly related to the growth controls we discussed.
Right. First, self-sufficiency and growth signals. Cancer cells don't need normal external cues to divide. They often generate their own internal signals or have pathways stuck on.
Second.
Insensitivity to anti-growth signals. They ignore signals that would normally tell them to stop dividing, like signals mediated by TSGs like PRB or proteins like TGFA.
And third, evading apoptosis. They resist programmed cell death, even when damaged. That involves messing with pathways involving P53 or proteins like BCL2.
Exactly. Those first three are about deregulating the cell cycle and survival. The next three are more about tissue invasion and persistence.
Okay, number 4.
Limitless replicative potential. Normal cells can only divide a certain number of times before they senesce or die, partly due to shortening telomeres at the ends of chromosomes. Cancer cells often reactivate an enzyme called telomerase to maintain telomere length, allowing them to divide indefinitely. They become immortal, in a sense.
Immortality. Number 5.
Sustained angiogenesis. Tumors need nutrients and oxygen to grow beyond a tiny size. They develop the ability to induce the formation of new blood vessels to supply themselves.
Feeding themselves. And the last, deadliest hallmark.
Number 6. Tissue invasion and metastasis. The ability to break away from the primary tumor, invade surrounding tissues, enter blood or lymph vessels, travel to distant sites, and form secondary tumors. As we said, this is the cause of most cancer deaths.
So these 6 hallmarks really capture the essence of what makes a cancer cell malignant. It's acquired all these dangerous abilities through accumulated genetic damage.
That's the picture, yes. A battle between oncogenes pushing for growth and TSGs trying to hold things back, with the cancer cell eventually winning by acquiring these hallmark capabilities.
So to recap for everyone listening, cancer is fundamentally genetic, driven by mutations. These mutations activate oncogene, the accelerators like RAS, requiring only one hit. And they inactivate tumor suppressor genes, the brakes like RB and P53, usually requiring 2 hits.
And the accumulation of these hits leads to cells acquiring those 6 hallmark capabilities. Self-sufficient growth, ignoring stop signals, evading death, unlimited division, getting blood supply, and crucially, invasion and metastasis.
Before we wrap up, any final thought based on the source material? Something for listeners to mull over.
Well, thinking about that third hallmark, evading apoptosis, the source touches on BCL2. This is a protein that represses apoptosis. It keeps the cell alive.
Right, the opposite of BX, which P53 can activate.
Exactly. And the text notes that in some cancers, like certain prostate cancers, BCL2 can be overexpressed. This makes the cancer cells highly resistant to dying, even when faced with treatments like androgen deprivation therapy, which would normally trigger apoptosis.
So understanding how cancer cells cheat death is key to treatment.
Absolutely. Targeting that BCL2 pathway or other anti-apoptotic mechanisms is a major focus. If you can develop drugs that specifically inhibit BCL2, you might be able to flick that survival switch back off and make cancer cells susceptible to dying again. It highlights how understanding these fundamental genetic pathways directly informs new therapeutic strategies.
A powerful connection between basic science and clinical application. This has been a fantastic rapid tour through some really dense but vital material. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.